Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, all you digital rock stars. It's time to grab your axe and play along with some of the sick riffs that we have for you today here on Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. And here to wail some magic about the here and now and heading into the future. Right into the microphone, it's our lead singer, it's Matthew Dickerson. Sing for us, Matt.
Just got to warm up first here. So thank you for that intro, knowing that I cannot sing to save my life, but hopefully I'll sing some Tech Talk tunes for us today.
It's all metaphorical singing.
Exactly right. So I've been to a conference this week, and I love going to conferences, and you learn so much, and you never know the little tidbits you're going to get out of a conference. You hear the big presentations and the glossy on the stage presentations.
I can imagine there's a lot of stuff that you could probably listen through, not listen to.
Sometimes there's a bit of that as well, because they're probably addressing the lowest common denominator in the conference, and they're making sure that everyone is on board and understands the basics there. But what I do enjoy is going around to the trade stands and talking to people there, because they've got all their new products they're trying to...
Oh, they've got to have free stuff too, surely.
Well, they do, but I don't like taking the free stuff, because then you feel a bit betrothed or a bit dirty. It's like, I should recommend that product now because I've got a freebie out of that, and then I feel dirty, so I just leave them there. And you do see people who can hardly walk out of the place because they're carrying so many tote bags. A friend of mine was famous for pens. So not expensive, but he just wanted to have every pen that he could possibly get from the various stands. So he would come out of there, like he would have 10 lifetimes of writing ability with the number of pens he would collect as he went around. But one thing I did find out, which I thought was interesting, is we've now got phones that fold and flip. So we've got this wonderful technology that manufacturers have come up with that allows a screen, which typically is a pretty flat, hard surface, to fold in half. And this isn't brand new technology. But I'm intrigued by some of the discussions at the conference by some of those manufacturers about the future of that. Now, you remember the old flip phones before we had smartphones.
They were cool when they came out, and they got out of fashion very quickly.
They did, but they were everywhere. When folding phones, when flip phones came out, that was it. That was the only phone you could possibly have, and they fold in half and you slip it in your pocket.
Yep.
And it made sense because when you open it up, there was a screen on one half and a keyboard, a number pad, a keypad. On the other half, so that made perfect sense. But you've obviously got companies like Apple and other companies that are sticking to just a flat screen. Now, is that because they haven't got the technology? Surely they could steal it. Or, sorry, Apple, I'm sure you wouldn't. I'm not accusing you of stealing here, but surely they could borrow the technology or patent the technology from other manufacturers. There are other manufacturers who are sticking with flat screens, and there are other ones who are focused very strongly on folding and flipping their phones. And I don't know where it's headed, because the folding and flipping phones look great. When you look at the crease down the middle, you can hardly see it. They're actually quite convenient. The Fold, for example, you can use it with one thumb across the screen, so you can do most things with the thumb because it's a bit skinnier. But then when you want the wider phone, you fold it out and you go, wow, look at all that screen real estate. But it's not as if those sales are going ballistic. It's still, the flat phones are still outselling the folding and the flipping phones. Now, price could be a part of it.
Could this be a whole VHS versus beta thing where people just don't catch on, they just like what they like?
Yeah, it could be.
Sorry.
Well, and that's a possibility. I don't quite understand it, because the amount of R&D that certain companies have spent on getting a screen that folds, that's not an easy thing. You can imagine sitting on the board going, well, why don't we have a flip phone like we used to have? And the engineers in the corner start quivering and shaking and breaking out in a cold sweat. How do I do that? But
it's a golden egg now.
Yeah, that's right. So I am intrigued by that. I can't give you an answer as to where it's going. People who have got their phones that fold or flip love them. People who have got their flat phones still love them. The real test, I think, would be a company like Apple that's got a large market share. If they brought out a folding or a flipping phone, which I haven't seen any plans in this year, for example, for them to bring one out. But if they brought one out, then is it about the operating system or is it about the actual form factor of the phone? So it's intriguing, but I still love the technology in those phones.
It will be interesting to go fast forward 2 years and look back on all this guesswork that we've had.
That's right, and we're meant to be doing that, aren't we? Fast forwarding several years in the future, and I can't give you a prediction on this one.
Without a smidget of irony, we're going to kick off our episode today by marking the end of an era. Today we pay an homage to an old friend with one foot in the grave. It's time to farewell the 3G network, folks. Remember 3G? It was there when you sent your first photos through thin air. It was there when I got married. It was there when each of my sons were born. It saw some good times and it saw some bad times. And it did its job without complaint. And then 4G came along and things got a bit quieter for it. But it kept going. And then 5G came along. But like an old Datsun 240Z, it just kept going. But folks, it's time. I guess it's just the circle of life. Thanks for the memories, 3G. Matt, what have we got to say about that?
Well, it is one of those things that I don't think we probably realise just how much of a difference 3G made to our daily lives now. So 3G was introduced back in Australia in April 2003.
Yeah.
And it was released with a huge promise of incredible data speeds and being able to send ridiculously sized files and photos, as you say, over the air. And it probably delivered on a lot of that hype. And it would be fair to say that the smartphones that we enjoy today probably only were possible once we had data speeds that 3G delivered for us.
Yeah, so 3G really opened the door and paved the way. And it was probably marks the point where things changed the most, I guess.
I think you're spot on. I think that's exactly right. And here we are. So the timeline is that the three carriers in Australia, Vodafone in December this year, December 2023, will switch off 3G. Telstra at the end of June 2024 will switch off 3G. And Optus in September 2024 will switch off their 3G network. So essentially, that'll be it, dead and gone. Now, there are some concerns from some people because there are times when you're travelling on regional roads and you're driving along and your phone drops out of 5G, then drops out of 4G, and then sometimes you see 3G come up. And you know that's come up because you try to send that beautiful photo you took on Instagram and it's just not going or it's taking forever. And you go, what a joke this 3G network is. But of course, the photos are much larger than they were when 3G was first introduced. So that's interesting. Now, why are they doing that? Why not just leave it ticking away there? You might need it for some regional coverage in some areas. Surely that's okay. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One that's an economic reason, but one is a crucial reason. It's probably not economical for a carrier to maintain a 3G network. It's like maintaining a telegraph system where you've still got people who come in once every 6 months as a novelty to send a telegram. Well, why would we maintain a network for that?
It's like investing in that Datsun 250Z as your family car.
That's right, and keep repairing it. That's right, and having the tools for it and all the rest of it. Yeah. So carriers aren't going to spend a lot of money, or they don't want to spend a lot of money, put it that way, on maintaining the network. And given the fact that it's now 20 years old, around about that 20 to maybe 25 years seems to be the timeline of most of the G of networks, 2G, 3G, 4G, etc. That seems to be about the sort of timeline. But there is a much more important reason, of course, and we've got spectrum reallocation. So there's only so much spectrum, so many frequencies we can use to transmit our radio signals. And the 3G network primarily uses 850 megahertz and 2100 megahertz. If you have those two frequencies tied up with 3G, then you can't have them used for 4G or 5G.
Yeah, right.
The usage of frequencies by 5G in particular is much more efficient than the usage by 3G. They have smaller time slices, or time slices is not the right word, smaller frequency chunks that are used by the 5G network. So essentially you can actually fit more data, more users on a 5G version of the same frequency. Right. So that's important, obviously. One of the things that's really interesting, though, of course, and I do remember back to when they were switching off the analog network, and it was initially going to be December 1999. They're going to switch off the analog network, the AMPS network, and they ended up going out to September 2000, and that was because they didn't have the same coverage with the new digital networks that were around at the time, so they had to extend that just a little bit. And in fact, CDMA was introduced as a bit of a stopgap measure. It was probably the shortest of just about any of the technologies that I can remember. CDMA was introduced in September 1999 for regional users that needed the coverage of analog with some of the features of digital. So it wasn't quite as good as digital, but it had some of that extra coverage. But it only lasted from September 99 to July 2012. But more importantly, when analog was turned off in September 2000, then it could fill that gap there. The really interesting part is that the three carriers have had or have made different promises about their coverage under 4G and 5G once the 3G network is switched off.
Right.
Will the government step in and make them extend that? Well, I think there's been enough warnings around already that you've got to get these other networks right before you go and switch off the 3G network. So I think the 3G networks will switch off. And then that brings me to another point. And this is, I apologise for this being such a long story, but it is a big issue.
Very interesting.
There are some organisations out there and different devices out there that are using 3G. You may not even be aware of it. Yeah, so, for example, alarm systems, when you've got your arming and disarming of an alarm system, it sends a tiny little minuscule bit of data. So often those are 3G. When the alarm signal goes, so someone breaks into your house or your business and it sends an alarm signal, back in the old days it would use a telephone dialer, but of course people just turned up outside the house and cut the phone lines and then broke in, so they changed that over to be a mobile phone dialer, but 3G often those used because, again, it doesn't need to send much data.
So is there any capacity to maybe turn it off for a couple of months and then turn it back on again just to see
see what stopped working?
See what stopped working, see if anyone had any major problems or?
Well, they're probably no, I think is the simple answer to that. I don't think they'll do that. But I'm a bit more worried about, so there's alarms, but I'm a bit more worried about some medical equipment, emergency alert systems. Some medical alerts that people put around their neck have got a base station, so around their home, they press the button and it rings out from there. But that was a bit limiting for some people, so they put in 3G versions of those. And the reason they'd use 3G for those is because the 3G hardware is cheap. It's very old, so it's much cheaper, and again, not much data is sent. You press the button and it says Matthew Dickinson's fallen over and he's at this location. So you're not sending a lot of data there. You're not sending photos of Matthew Dickinson falling over. So you've got those type of things. You've also got older FPOS terminals, flood monitoring systems, traffic light controls, agricultural management tools. This is a really important one. Pet trackers. So you might lose where your pet is when 3G gets switched off. Vehicle trackers. In fact, the first Tesla that I bought, the Tesla Model S, when I bought that, it had 3G in it. And I thought that was interesting that a very modern car still only had 3G, but again, it wasn't using a lot of data for that. Now, there is an upgrade module, so I don't have that car anymore, but if you had one of those cars, you could upgrade the module to 4G, which makes sense. But that's a bigger concern for me. The reception range, hopefully the carriers get it right. But all of these other devices, so I suppose the message here is go and check anything you've got that connects to the outside world, and you may not even be aware of how it does.
Go and check even the stuff you're not aware of.
Yeah, that's right. The stuff you don't know about, check that.
So on the 1st of October this year, if the wheels start falling off everything and everyone's going crazy and it just seems like we've gone into the purge, then it could be because 3G has been flicked off.
And here's the other challenging part. You might have an FPOS terminal with your bank. You don't know who the carrier is. You could probably take off the back and have a look at the SIM card, but maybe someone got the SIM card built in as part of the actual device itself. So you don't know. So if it stops working in December this year is Vodafone. So if it stops working in December this year or June next year or September next year, then that might be the carrier, depending on which carrier your particular company is using. And that's the same with all of those, whether it be your car or your alarm system, whoever. You're not the one normally that goes out and does that connection. You don't go into a phone store and connect a SIM card and then come home and put it in your alarm system. It's all part of the device that was bought at some stage. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so the message is start stashing canned food and toilet paper.
That's right. And make sure you've got some physical locks on your house rather than relying on your alarm system.
Netflix is officially for everybody, folks. I think that's how they want it to be known, at least. I guess for the longest time, I'd assumed that TV was a wasted effort for people with visual impairment. So little I know. For a while now, some TV has had audio description options so that the visually impaired could indulge in some idiot box, even if only for a limited range of shows. Always seeking the edge, though, Netflix is getting on board and working hard to add audio descriptions to a broad range of its collection. This is a mammoth task, isn't it, Matt?
Mammoth task, and I'm not sure they're there yet, and that's why there's been a petition started from a 20-year-old student from Brisbane, and good on her for going out and not taking on Netflix, encouraging Netflix to do this. Now, we have talked about subtitles before and the fact that my kids, who can all hear, actually turn on subtitles. They come home.
My students, when we watch a YouTube clip, want the subtitles, even when they're wrong.
That's the thing, isn't it? Because some of them are auto-generated, so sometimes they are wrong, exactly right. So one thing we don't think about, though, is the reverse of that. You need the audio description. So you want to be able to see or hear, what's happening. So if you're blind, you can't see what's happening. You can listen to the dialogue. And so you're hearing that, but you don't know that James has left the room when I'm talking about James. You don't know the actions that are occurring. Now, modern movies and modern TV shows have audio descriptions. You can turn on audio descriptions, which makes sense. So you're sitting there on the couch, you're a bit distracted, if you can see, and you're hearing that so-and-so's left the room and now there's a different scene and they've now cut to a scene of a mountain and whatever it might be, that all makes sense. But older shows, and here's the challenge, you've got some old classics, and in this particular case, this student said that she loves Gilmore Girls and Friends, so 2 old classic TV shows.
From the late 90s and early 2000s, yeah.
Yeah, absolute classics. And why wouldn't you want to sit around and watch, or in her case, listen to those? But again, I can just think of Friends, and you can just imagine the different scenes when you're in the Central Perk Cafe or up in the apartment or changing to someone's workplace. You need to know the context of where you are.
Oh, and particularly it'd be frustrating because a lot of that, they've got canned laughter and whatnot, and some of the jokes are visual. So things go silent and then the audience laughs and you're left thinking, well, something's happened there.
I'd be intrigued to actually listen to some of the audio descriptions to see how it describes exactly what's occurring on screen. And for some of those American sitcoms, they're a bit obvious in some of their humour. So that would be, Joey comes in and has a look on his face like this, and that's why there's laughter there. And so it would be very obvious, you think, describing some of that humour in there. But again, I'm lucky I can see. There are people out there who can't see, and we sometimes forget about people less fortunate than ourselves. But there's a technology solution, but it's just not been applied to older shows, older movies, that type of thing. But what a job for Netflix or anyone to do. And I suppose the question is it really Netflix's job to do it, or they obviously license Friends off whoever made Friends, off the producers of Friends, so they're paying a fee to do that. So that would make more sense to actually approach them and say, hey, you need this for not just Netflix, because there's other ways you can watch Friends as well.
Yeah. Very interesting. Something I'd never thought about. Yeah,
no, I never thought about it either, but obviously there are people out there who this is a big thing
Real
for.
eye-opener, if you pardon the pun. We've talked a bit on this podcast about early warning systems for health, personal protection and natural disasters. This story at least, falls into the last category as Australia hurtles headlong into another El Nino after a year of lush La Nina growth. The dry-off and subsequent bushfire season looms ominously. As I said, we've discussed bushfire early detection mechanisms before. They're all about enabling a quick response, but a quick response will depend on a selection of different types of these detection mechanisms. Anything set on the ground needs to be cheap, easily powered and easily replaced. Matt, what's the latest tech on this front?
I actually think the very first episode we did of this podcast talked about satellite detection of bushfires. So we're going back a few years now, and that was obviously a big thing and breaking news then. We've also talked recently about cameras being set up in bushfire-prone areas.
That was only a couple of months ago.
Yeah, so this latest one is being used already over in Europe and North America, and it's actually detecting gas in the air, gas changes in the air.
Yeah, okay.
Now, the problem is you need a number of these devices. They're low cost. They're solar powered. One thing I really liked about it was when I thought about solar powered, I thought, well, that means there's a battery in there. Do you want to go and put a bunch of batteries in a bushfire-prone area? Doesn't that sound like it won't go so well? But they actually use capacitors to store some energy in there, which capacitors can be used to store energy, of course. They use those to avoid the high fire, the high temperature burning of a lithium-ion battery, for example.
Clever.
So, I thought that was quite clever. So what they do is they put a number of these around. They've got the ability to communicate to the outside world. I'm assuming not with 3G. so they've thought about that in advance, I'm sure. And then they're solar powered, so they've got power in them, and they just monitor the gas in the air. Now, it doesn't take a lot of gas change for these sensors to say there's a gas change here, send an alert off to the first responders. And again, as we've talked about before, if you can get there when it's a little smouldering nothingness, you can put it out and say, good, let's go home and have a cup of tea. It's when it goes from that nothingness hours later to be a raging bushfire or wildfire, I think they call them in America, that's when it's a bit of a problem. Now, the biggest issue I see with these is that each sensor only covers about the size of a football field. So if you want to go into an area that's prone to have bushfires, you're going to put a lot of these in. Now, they're low cost, which is good. I imagine that you'd overlap them somewhat so that you wouldn't just go just football-sized field and that was it. You'd overlap them in case something went wrong or maybe one's not getting enough sun or whatever it might be. But I think we're getting better and better, and we're going to have to because, as you said, there's been some incredible undergrowth over the last year or two, and now you combine that with a nice hot summer, our warmest winter ever. We've just come off on record, so we're going into this wonderful warm season where all this undergrowth is going to be nice and dry, and it's going to be hopefully not. Hopefully we've got enough technology to help us, but there's the potential for it to be a huge bushfire season. So doing things like this is great. They're not here yet. That is one of the minor problems. But because they're being used in Europe and North America already, they're ready to go. They're ready to scale up. It's just a matter of how many of these they can manufacture, and then they can communicate back to bushfire responders. So it sounds pretty cool.
Goodness me, yeah. And as we say, if we've got several ways of checking, then you've got your triple and double checks and whatnot. And so, hopefully save properties, save lives.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And let's face it, if we use some of this technology and, as you said, some other technologies, then you get a couple of false alarms. Well, it means that a couple of guys drove out in a truck to an area and went, nothing here, and turned around and go back home. I can live with that, and I can live with society paying for that, covering the cost of the rural bushfire service or the rural fire service, etc.
For sure.
But again, you prefer that than the other way around, where I'm not sure about that one. We'll just leave it go.
Well, see what happens. Yeah. And now for another early warning device to save lives. It's a heart scanning device to catch all manner of afflictions. It's been FDA approved in the States, so it should be on the shelves very soon, Matt.
It is actually going to be on the shelves in America very soon. And I actually was impressed with how cheap, and I say cheap in inverted commas, it's not too bad. It's about $540 Aussie, about $400 in the US. So that sounds expensive for a set of scales, but this isn't your average set of scales. And I'm sure we talked about this when it was first shown off at CES 2022. So we probably talked about it at the beginning of last year as a device I was showing off, but now it's there. It's being sold now as we speak. It's a set of scales with a handle. So maybe that's for people that are getting a bit old and frail and need some way of steadying themselves, but the handle is part of the sensors. So you've got sensors on the scale themselves, so 14 electrodes on the scales, and then you've got 4 electrodes on the handle. And the idea here is when you stand on it, it checks not just your weight, but it checks some parts of your bodily function, including your heart rate and any sort of issues you might have with your heart rate. So this is something going to the next level. It can test nerve activity. It can test vascular age. It can test signs of neuropathy. So you've got a whole range of things. And being FDA approved doesn't say that it's all perfect, but at least it's a step along the way. So FDA has said, well, we've checked it, and it doesn't mean that everything's working perfectly, but it's not dangerous. So the little tiny bit of electricity that it puts through your body is not going to electrocute you, is not going to do any damage to you. Does it give you perfect results? They didn't say that. They just said that, yes, this is safe to use. That's kind of the first step. And then I assume out there in the real world,
once it gets out in the marketplace, it'll have people scrutinising it a bit more closely, and perhaps even people developing it even further.
Well, developing the concept. So I think it's fantastic, but we are getting better with our health devices. We often talk about that. Early detection, checking out our body, making sure things are going well. Again, it's fantastic where we're going. Hopefully, that means that people get on this scale, look at their body and say, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be eating junk food 3 meals a day, and maybe I should do some exercise.
I feel like that's a very pointed comment at me there.
Not at all.
And here's another one to help us keep ourselves natural disaster free. Whenever we go to the beach, my wife runs us through a quick tsunami plan. It's tongue-in-cheek, of course, but behind every joke. Here's another example of AI put to use. This time, our friend AI takes atmospheric clues to spot early signs of monster waves, which then it hopefully sends to an early alert to anyone closer to sea level than the 5th floor. If I could just read my lines clearly. Matt, this has the potential to save thousands of lives, and it uses some pretty nifty tech.
It does, and there's a couple of things that I find interesting here. The first one is the pronunciation of B-U-O-Y. I say boy.
Yeah.
But
Americans say buoy.
Buoy, I know.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've been watching a TV show and I hear someone say buoy and I go, what was that word? And then I turn the subtitles on, of course. Yeah, and it says B-U-O-Y. Well, that's a boy, not a buoy. But there's a few things. The first thing is that there are buoy or buoy-based systems that you can install out in the ocean to detect a tsunami, because obviously there's a big wave that's travelling along out in the ocean before it gets to a tsunami on the shore. So you can put those in, but you can imagine you're putting them out in the ocean along every shoreline that you might want to think is possibly going to have a tsunami one day, and then monitoring those checking them because you want to make sure they're working, because obviously you don't want to have the tsunami one day and go, oh, didn't you check the batteries in that? What were you doing? That was your job. No, that was your job. So that's the first thing. Buoys have been used and still are used at the moment, but it's a complicated system. The other thing that I find really fascinating about this story is that we tend to think, well, I tend to think in a simplistic way, that radio signals typically travel at 3 by 10 to the 8 metres per second, same as the speed of light. Now, that's kind of true-ish, but depending on what those radio signals are travelling through, it might change that ever so slightly.
Yeah, so you're going to get some sort of a refraction, I would guess.
Well, you've got different things that might be travelling through. So, for example, NASA had done some research on this, and they found that the charged particle density in the Earth's ionosphere, which is 350 kilometres above the Earth, for example, that affected the speed of transmission between ground-based devices and satellites. Now, you can imagine, it's not going to be much. It's not as if they go, wow, that 3 by 10 to the 8, now that's going at 50 kilometres an hour. It's going to be minuscule changes.
Yeah, but I'm guessing that those minuscule changes are still significant.
Enough. They're significant enough for tsunami detection. And so you go, how could that possibly be true? And so essentially, when you've got tsunami-triggered shock waves, they affect the density of some of that ionosphere. So that actually changes the speed of satellite radio signals. You're going along minding your own business, just being, I don't know, a GPS satellite or something, and you go, hold on a sec, that signal got a little bit slower to me than it should have done. Yeah, exactly. And so that must be a tsunami. Now, they're actually setting up this at the moment, and there's an algorithm that NASA have developed to basically look at those changes in charged particle density and then link that to a tsunami. It's not perfect yet. They've used AI to actually take some of this data. And you can imagine you've probably got some data you could use that isn't necessarily turning into a tsunami. You can have things that happen out in the ocean that don't always end up in a tsunami. But they think they've got it at the moment to about 90%. Oh, I'd like it a bit higher than that, please.
Yeah.
But 90% is not too bad, which is better than 0%. Again, you and your wife sitting on the beach sunning yourselves, and next thing you know, you go, man, I wish I was a big wave surfer because look at that thing coming in. So it's
that's when you start heading for the 5th floor of the nearest hotel.
That's it. I hope the foundations are solid. So that's where it sounds fascinating. But just imagine, I just love human ingenuity, sitting around going, damn, we've got this problem, because sometimes our signals aren't getting there and that might be affecting something else. And someone said, why aren't they getting there? You have a discussion. Next thing you know, someone's coming up with an early warning system for tsunamis based on some of the problem I'm sure they had with these charged particles in the ionosphere. Like, that's just fascinating.
You just need the right person thinking about that sort of a problem.
Yeah. And I'm sure someone else initially said, and this is not to degrade the people that have been working on this, but said, no, you just made a mistake. I'm sure that's wrong there because it's going to get to us at the same speed. Everything should be fine. Even detecting it, even noticing it in the first place. I love that ingenuity.
And that's right. And science and technology has been driven by these sorts of things, just by having the right person kick over the right rock and paying attention to what they've just kicked over. Ask
the question. And this is the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure you do it with your students in science when you say, do the results, and one of the smart students might say, oh, what are the results meant to be, Mr. Eddie? And I'm sure you would say, well, the results are what you find. So let's go out and do that.
That's right.
And if you remember the Mpemba effect.
Oh, I was just going to bring up the Mpemba
there you go.
effect.
Yeah, well, you go.
Yeah, well, Joseph Mpemba, he was a Year 9 student, sort of a 14, 15-year-old boy in Uganda in 1975. And there was some issue with his science assignment, and so he was trying to hurry things up. And he put some hot water in the freezer alongside some cool water, and he noticed that the hot water froze before the cool water. It doesn't happen in all circumstances. There's got to be an ideal set of conditions there, but he's got an effect named after him.
And the way I heard the story was that there was someone visiting the school, and they were asking questions, learned scientist, and he put his hand up and he said, why does water freeze quicker when it's been boiled? And everyone went, well, you're crazy. Of course it doesn't do that. And he said, yes, it does. And on from there. So again, he was inquisitive enough and also confident enough to ask the question, but he didn't realise that it wasn't meant to be that way. He was asking the question. Yeah. And I think that's sometimes the solution, isn't if you can ask the right question, get that answered, suddenly you've got a solution.
That's right. Well, it got a lot of smart minds thinking about that issue.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't believe that in 2023 we're still entertaining the idea that there might be a Loch Ness monster out there. I figured that the Goodies episode of the early 70s might have been the death knell for this sort of folly, but apparently more than 50 years later, there are still people who are committed to finding this thing. This next story is evidence that people will believe in anything. A high-tech mission has been launched and will hopefully end the myth of the Loch Ness Monster once and for all. Not. What's all the hubbub about, Matt? And can we turn this tech on Bigfoot as well while we're at it?
Well, I was thinking of both Sasquatch or Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster.
And I was trying to think, there's got to be others out there too that we've got to go and find.
Surely.
Yeah, mermaids
but
and stuff.
I was always concerned that with all the wonderful camera equipment we've got, and everyone's carrying a wonderful camera around their pocket with their smartphone now, they just never seem to have a good quality camera whenever Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster happen to be popping up. Why don't they carry good quality cameras, people? You're going out looking for these things. Take a good quality camera.
Look, for mine, it's also about understanding population dynamics and how long can a single individual live, and how many individuals do you need to keep a population alive? Anyway, let's keep going.
So you're saying there's got to be more than one Sasquatch?
There'd have to be lots and lots of Sasquatches out there, and if there's lots and lots, then maybe we might have spotted more of them.
Maybe.
Same as the Loch Ness Monster. Yeah. But anyway, the plesiosaur.
So I love the fact that people have said, you know what, let's throw some science at this myth. And the best we've got at this stage was the famous 1934 surgeon's photo, which later was proven to be a hoax.
Yes.
In fact, he said that was a hoax. Gotcha. So they're going out and they're doing thermal imaging with drones over the loch. So they're going out there and doing that. They're doing underwater hydrophones to pick up potential, get ready for it, Nessie-like calls. Given the fact we don't have a lot of information about the Loch Ness Monster, I'm not sure what a Nessie-like call is. Yeah. Maybe they got some voice actors in and said, what do you think Nessie would sound like? And now we'll go and listen for those things. But I just love the fact that someone said, you know what, this will be a good fun thing to do. And that'll show them. That'll prove that the Loch Ness Monster, at least with the Loch Ness Monster, is limited to one body of water. It's 57 square kilometres is the body of water. So it's not the world, whereas Sasquatch could be anywhere. Could be sitting outside this house right now. It could be anywhere. Maybe a few more trees around might be needed for Sasquatch to hide in. I'm not sure. But it seems to be popping up. And also, so to do it with Sasquatch would be very difficult, at least with the Loch Ness Monster. Let's tick that one off first. And surely then, once you've got science that shows definitively not there. And actually, that's an interesting one.
That's the problem because, not finding it is not proof that it doesn't exist.
That's right. There's a great quote in the movie about the females that helped in World War II in some of the mathematics they were doing. Oh, no, sorry, in Landing on the Moon. And there's a great quote on that. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So saying as much information as you like to say the Loch Ness Monster is not there does not prove it's not there. It just proves you haven't found it yet.
However, a basic understanding of population dynamics might. Anyway, let's just keep pushing on there.
Spoil sport, James. Logic and science you're putting to it, that's no fun at all.
Yeah.
So by the time people listen to this episode, the testing should have been completed. So you should be able to go and Google it and see what they found. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm with you. I'm going to say, get ready for it. They didn't find any evidence of Loch Ness, but I don't know for sure yet because we haven't got the results back yet.
Yeah, look, I'm going to go out on a limb. I reckon it exists. I'm going to back on everything I've said so far, and just put all my house and everything on it. The Loch Ness Monster's out there. There's only one of them, and it's been around for how many hundred years?
A fair while. Actually, when was the first sighting? It would have been...
Look, a blue whale or a sperm whale lives for about 80 or 90 years.
Yep. Well, given the fact the 1934 photo was 90 years ago or 89 years ago, he'd have to be fairly old. Oh, well, he or she, Loch Ness Monster, I don't want to be sexist here, would have to be fairly old. And who were the mum and dad? Oh, look, it gets too complicated. So keep an eye for that. Go and Google it now and see what you find.
And it is scam alert time again, folks. The ATO has sent out a warning for people looking forward to a decent tax return. Matt, what are their chances of picking up scams?
Cost of pressure living is a great thing for people to get out there and scam you about. Because if you got a text message from the ATO, of course, that said you were going to get a much larger tax return than you thought, you could hardly wait to get that tax return.
It could be, forgiven for getting excited about it.
Exactly right. And the ATO has said that the tax returns this year are probably going to be a bit lower for a whole range of reasons. So people are expecting lower tax returns. But when you get that text message to say you've got a couple of $1,000s in your tax return, give it to me, baby. Fantastic. Of course, accompanying that text would be the details of your bank account details that were required and your date of birth, because they don't want to send the money to the wrong person. And, of course, you're handing over your identity to someone else. And that's a very scary thing. We have talked about that before. It's very difficult to get your identity back. Someone steals money, that's bad and annoying and frustrating, and you might get your money back or you might not. But when someone steals your identity, that's a whole bunch of trouble.
You then have to prove that you don't have all these loans.
Correct, yep. And your track record, then your debt history can be impacted. So the next time you go for a legitimate loan for a car, a house, or a bit of furniture from some furniture store, they say, sorry, sir, we see that you defaulted on several $1 million worth of home loans or whatever it might be. So that's all a bit of a problem. But the message really from the ATO here is very simple. Never, ever, ever, not maybe, not occasionally, never, ever will they send you a message with a link. They might send you a message. They might inform you of something, but they'll say, go and have a look on the ATO website or contact your tax agent. They'll direct you to look at it. So, again, with so many different little tricks that scammers are using, you've just got to be so conscious of not clicking on a link. I mean, it seems simple, doesn't it? But it's so convenient.
That's right.
Something comes in and you want to click on a link and they're good. So you might get a parcel that's coming and it says, click on this link just to see where your parcel's up to. Oh, that's pretty convenient. That's great. I'll do that. But again, if that link
Everyone
asks
loves
you for
a
details,
parcel too, don't they?
They do love a
And
parcel.
even if they're not expecting a parcel, to get a message that you've got a parcel coming.
Oh,
It's like,
fantastic.
what?
Yeah. It was my birthday 2 months ago. Someone must have sent me a parcel. I got stuck in the post. So it is one of those things that is frustrating and annoying. And we do a few warnings, a few public service announcements about it. But it's almost,
There's a need.
The scammers have got their timeline, their calendar for the year. Oh, look at this. It's now August, September. People are expecting tax returns. Action, tax return scam time. So the same as it'll be Christmas parcel scam time, or it'll be some other time of the year they've got their scams ready for it. So just be alert, people.
Life was easier when the scammers didn't do so much homework.
They're getting very sophisticated, aren't they?
We're all about sustainability here at Tech Talk, and if there's one thing to get the juices flowing, it's when we come across a story where one man's trash is another man's treasure. The coffee industry has taken off in the last 30 years in Australia, and we have not only some of the best baristas in the world, but we also consume more coffee than countries many times larger than us. That makes for a whole lot of used coffee grounds. Of course, these can be composted, but it also just so happens that the building industry in this country is crying out for innovation. So it's time we married two unlikely partners. A group of coffee-loving engineers from RMIT have seen the light. Matt, apparently Aussie Concrete loves coffee as well.
Apparently. Now, I just love this idea where you can have a building built out of concrete, and we'll describe it in a moment, but that aroma of coffee, is that built into?
What's that?
That's right. The whole time in your walls of concrete that your building's built out of, you've just got this lovely aroma. It is fascinating. And I don't remember when it happened that everyone that walks down the street has to have their hand out in front of them carrying a coffee cup.
Yeah.
I almost expect to see people running in a fun run carrying their coffee cup along because they wouldn't know what to do with their hand otherwise. So it has really taken off. And I don't remember when it happened. You said 30 years, but I don't know when suddenly it went from no one had coffee, or you had your 43 beans of Nescafe and suddenly everyone had to have a cappuccino. So it was a bit different. But globally, we consume we generate 18 million tonnes of used coffee grounds.
Wow.
That's a lot. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that ends up in landfill. You can compost it, as you said, but most people don't. They end up in landfill, and of course, that then contributes to methane. We talked about methane recently, about methane being much worse as a greenhouse gas rather than CO2. And the figures vary on that. I might have said something like 94 times worse last time we spoke about that, and it depends on the time frame. So I've heard figures anywhere from 20 times worse to 90 times worse, but it actually releases greenhouse gases quicker from methane, so it has a much greater effect in the short term. Over the long term, it's still worse than CO2, but it tails off as such. So you might hear figures from anywhere from 20 times to 90 times, but bottom line is it's worse than CO2. What can we do with it? Well, I'm again intrigued by why people are doing this. This is down the RMIT University in Melbourne, so a lot of coffee is drunk in Melbourne, obviously. They thought there'd be a market for this. They took the coffee grounds, they heated them randomly, probably not randomly, they probably did some experiments, to 350 degrees Celsius for 2 hours in an oxygen-free environment. And then the obvious thing to do with that biochar was to mix it with concrete. Go figure. I don't know. Again, I'd just love to see the progress, these steps that someone went through.
Yeah, who had the idea of doing this?
Yeah.
It's like the first person who ever prepared olives. Like if you've ever had a raw olive fresh from the tree, there's no taste like it, and you're not getting rid of that taste out of your mouth for a long time.
And you're not going back for a second one.
And someone thought, well, perhaps if we do, and like the processing of an olive is a really, really hard thing. How you get from coffee grounds to let's put these in concrete.
That's right. And not just let's put them in concrete, let's put them to a certain temperature, create an environment, go through all that process to go, hey, look at this.
I reckon it happened at a party and there was some stuff going around.
Quite possibly.
An engineer's party.
Are you making comments about university students?
Not at all.
So they replaced 15% of the sand in the concrete, and they found they had concrete that was stronger, increased by 29%. So you're getting a double bonus here. You're getting coffee grounds that might have gone into landfill and you put them in concrete, so you're reducing the amount of methane you're creating. And then you're getting concrete that's stronger, which then gives you a double bonus because theoretically you could use less concrete.
Yeah.
And of course, we know that concrete's bad for the environment. 8% of global carbon dioxide emissions come from concrete production. So reduce the amount of concrete because it's stronger and get rid of something that produces methane. Wow. How cool is that?
How long does it take to pour and cure some concrete? And if you can cut that time as well, you can throw up your buildings a bit faster perhaps as well.
Another bonus, triple bonus.
This is the gift that keeps on giving.
It is. So all from some people smoking some drugs at a university party. Sounds fantastic. But it is quite fascinating. They're still doing their testing at the moment. It's still at university stage, not out in production stage, not out in the real world yet. But
what a clever idea.
What a clever idea, and I think we'll see much more of this.
I just took the family overseas a couple of months ago as part of an extended family get-together. When we were hatching the idea at Christmas time, though, everything was looking like a very neat and fairly cheap plan. But once we'd started to commit to buying plane tickets and accommodation, the costs blew out something fierce and things got financially out of hand pretty quickly. Our biggest expense was in the airfares. Matt, Google has got a big idea, and if they'd had this 9 months ago, they might have saved me a mozza. What's Google gone and done?
Everyone knows that you're selling an airline ticket and you sell, or you don't, the airline sells it for a whole range of different prices, but you don't know the algorithm. And the airlines aren't going to tell you. And there's so many variables in there. There's some airlines, and a friend of mine cottoned onto one airline that if there are tickets left, so if they're trying to get somewhere and it's not urgent, they get on that particular flight, 24 hours beforehand, suddenly the price drops. Because you don't want to fly a plane with empty seats, so suddenly the price drops. Then there's other airlines that if you buy the ticket, say 10 or 11 months in advance, it's cheap because they want to get some people on those planes to make sure that it's viable actually to fly them in the first place. So there's so many variables in there.
When we did our research at Christmas time, we were looking at flights for less than $1,000. When we came to buying those tickets, they were at $1,800.
Yeah, there you go. And again, it just depends on what's happened in the meantime. How many people have bought tickets in that time frame? So when's the best time to buy the flights? Who knows? I don't know. And I really don't have the time to go and spend every day researching it over many months and then go, the best time was 3 months ago. Damn, I should have got it then.
Yeah, and there was some forehead slapping going on around in my family then.
Look, 2020 hindsight is wonderful, isn't it? But did you know then? Of course not. But Google does. So what Google Flights is doing at the moment is they're analysing the data. And again, this is the power of AI, analysing the data on a constant basis just to see what prices flights are. So then when you come along and say, I'd like to fly to Timbuktu, and when's the best time for me to buy a flight? Well, Google Flights says, well, actually, that destination, based on all the research I've done over the last 3 years worth of flights, buy it 32 days and 5 hours before the flight, and that'll be your cheapest time. And it makes so much sense. I'm sure the airlines hate it because it almost sounds like you're gaming the system, but their algorithm is probably gaming the system in the other way. So let's have a bit of a gamification back in the other direction.
Congratulations, Qantas, on your how many $1 billion of profits recently. I don't want to attack anyone in particular, but goodness me.
Yeah. So this is a way, hopefully, for people to get those flights back to a cheaper price. And I find it fascinating. I understand why, but I find it fascinating that you can be sitting beside someone on a plane and you're both paid dramatically different prices. In fact, I love it. Every now and again, you'll get the free upgrade to business class when you're going on an overseas flight. And I love just standing there in the line beside people who have paid the full price for business and go, I only paid $1,000 for this ticket. What did you pay? Oh, I paid $6,000 for that. And you start laughing and chuckling away. And then I talk to you again. But again, it seems unfair in some ways. But again, I understand the basics of the economics of filling that plane up with enough variety of fares. So at the moment, it's only for US flights, so flights departing from the US. But let's face it, it'll obviously roll out across the world. That AI tool doesn't need a bunch of people thrown at it. It needs just a bunch of direction to say, go and analyse this. And the other part is it probably needs numbers. So it's going to be more valuable, or it's going to be more consistent in the data it puts out when they've got lots of flights. So if you've got somewhere that flies once a week between two locations, it's probably not going to be great for getting you the best prices on flights. But if you've got somewhere that's flying regularly, many flights a day, then I think you're going to get some pretty good flight prices out of it from all that data, all that research.
We'll keep your ear to the ground about that, folks. And on that note, it is time to stow our tray tables and put our seats in the upright position because this flight is coming into land. Move quickly, folks. The stewardesses are getting stroppy. Thanks for another awesome tech talk there, Matt.
And I just hope the planes aren't using 3G to get them to their location. Otherwise, we might be in trouble.
Fingers crossed about that.
That's right.
I've just got to say that the search for the Loch Ness Monster is evidence that people will believe in anything. I need to get all those people with their tech gear out to get the boogeymen from out of my bed. That's all we got for you now, folks. Thanks for tuning in once again to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. I'm your host, James Eddy, reminding you that if you're in the hunt for bunyips and other inland waterway monsters, or if you have troubles with gremlins, goblins or Sasquatches, then it's best to keep that rubbish to yourself or you'll have no friends at Christmas. If not, then why don't you tune in next week for our next sparkling episode? See you then.